Devil's Roar, the most forgotten region in Sea of Thieves, with its harsh landscape decorated by the fiery rain of volcanoes intent on sinking your ship, and the constant eruption of geysers sending you hurtling to your death. This land is supposed to be an additional challenge that hides even greater rewards for any pirate who's willing to traverse its shores. However, in recent times, the Roar has been largely empty. It's rare to even find a single player embarking on an Ashen voyage, as there's simply no incentive to anymore. With the wealth of new content being added to the other regions of the map, the Roar has sadly become outdated. Some of my fondest memories of playing Sea of Thieves have come from the Devil's Roar. So today, let's take a look at some ways Rare could breathe new life into this forgotten region, and hopefully bring the Roar back to its former glory. Firstly, let's take a look at some of the main reasons the Roar died off to begin with. The first major issue comes from the tedium of the geysers and volcanoes. While the region lacks a real reward compared to the others, or even a challenge, the hardest part is just keeping your sanity while you wait on the island to stop throwing a fit. It lacks the immense paranoia and fear that the rest of the map holds. The Roar is seen by most players as a PvE zone, so there's little to no threat of other pirates coming out to sink you. This is largely due to the volcanoes. One strike from an eruption can often end a fight while you have no control over it and no way to recover. There is also just no incentive to fight in the Roar anymore. Players there rarely have the new most valuable types of loot, as at this point, Ashen loot is largely outdated. Without the constant threat of PvP, the Roar's PvE just isn't entertaining enough, especially when we look at the lack of variety compared to the rest of the map. Many new forms of PvE have been added to the game, but not to the Roar. Shrines and treasuries, sea forts, Legend of the Veil, even all of the world events that have been introduced over the years, none of them are available in the Devil's Roar. So we're left with a bunch of out-of-date voyages with low payouts compared to newer content that also often wind up taking longer due to sitting around waiting on volcanoes. The only uses for the Roar currently are doing Ashen Vaults, or anybody still on their Pirate Legend grind, which doesn't take any longer than a few hours nowadays. Most of the Roar's problems, at least in my opinion, can be fixed by simply upping the reward for the region. This will encourage people to hunt down ships in the Roar and lead to an increase in PvP. So firstly, let's get the easy stuff out of the way. Give the Roar 2 sea forts with Phantom and Ashen loot inside. Already, this will make the Roar far more entertaining, and with how unique the Roar looks, these sea forts will look entirely different to any others. Secondly, I would introduce an Ashen variety of the Legend of the Veil, with Ashen loot available throughout and an Ashen Athena at the end. Now, as for the shrines and treasuries, I don't see a point of just dumping one of these into the Roar. Not only does it not fit in, but you just be getting coral loot, which is worth less than Ashen. So instead, let's have something brand new. I would love to see a dungeon with the same mechanics of leaving your ship above the water while you dive below, but instead of a siren storehouse, it's a hideout for Flameheart's followers, in a similar style to what we see in the Heart of Fire. This would be amazing to traverse, and due to the Roar's smaller size, your chances of being noticed and therefore the risk is much higher. However, I would place this out of the range of volcanoes, just to keep it slightly less impossible for solo players. These few changes already would make the Roar far more exciting with so much more to do. However, the last change, in my opinion, is both the biggest, but would also be the most impactful in bringing back the region. So creators often talk about Molten Sands as a nearly useless fort. There's no reason to sail out there with how rarely it activates, and how far it is from everything else, even within the Roar. Never mind the volcanoes and geysers that make clearing any world event there far more tedious. But what if we could recreate the same rush as back when Fort of the Damned first came out? This could be a video of its own, but for now, I'll try just give a brief summary. Players could find brand new Ashen ritual skulls washing up on the shores or dropped from Ashen Lords. These must be taken to Molten Sands in order to activate this new world event. A horn would sound to alert the entire server, and a cloud shaped like Flameheart's skull would mark the sky, much like we see with Davy Jones in Lords of the Sea. This world event would be split into two separate phases. In Phase 1, the players will battle through 13 waves of skeletons, only these skeletons wouldn't be directly targeting the players. Instead, they'd be trying to attack the Ashen Ritual Skull, causing it to heat up. Players can splash water on the skull in order to cool it down. However, if the skull ever heats up too far, it will explode, ending the world event in a failure and destroying the Ritual Skull. On the 10th wave, an Ashen Lord would arrive. This Ashen Lord would target the players and act completely as normal. However, it doesn't count towards the wave. Meaning, if you kill all of the skeletons targeting the skull, the next wave will arrive, even with the Ashen Lord still roaming around. The first phase ends when the Ashen Lord has been killed. At the end of the first phase, players are presented with a choice. They can either use the Ritual Skull to unlock a smaller vault equivalent to the payout of a Fort of the Damned, or they can progress on to the world event's second phase. The second phase is a boss fight against the Herald of the Flame. As soon as the Herald awakens, Molten Sands volcano, which would have remained dormant for the first phase, will immediately come to life. The water around and within the island would boil, preventing the players from cooling down the skull. The Herald would possess the same abilities he did in the adventure, only any skeletons he summons during the fight will go after the skull. On top of this, players must contend against several waves of skeletons attempting to destroy the Ritual Skull. This phase ends when the Herald has been killed, dropping the key to the main vault alongside a second Ashen Wind skull. This world event is designed to be grueling and long, as well as challenging to attack. If at any point there isn't a player protecting the skull, it will simply be destroyed and nobody will get the loot. Ultimate example of risk versus reward. Do you cash out after phase 1? Or do you risk going for the big vault, but also increase your likelihood of getting attacked and losing the skull? As for the payout for the main vault, due to the amount of work put in to unlock it, I would say it easily has to be the biggest payout of anything in the game. I would include at least 2 Ashen Athenas, a multitude of cursed chests, mostly made up of chests of rage, various Ashen loot, the 2 Ashen Wind skulls you require from killing both the Herald and the Ashen Lord, as well as a box of wondrous secrets with new commendations and cosmetics for turning them into Grace Marrow, just like we saw with the Chest of Fortune. Now this is by no means a small fix or small patch, it's quite a lot just to fix some old content. But with how underused the roar is, I feel like it's worth the effort. Nothing I said today is by any means perfect, and I could sit here and tweak it endlessly, but I feel like this is a good jumping off point to at the very least start a discussion about how we can bring the roar back, and maybe we can start to see some of these chaotic multi-crew fights happening in the roar. I'm curious, how would you all tweak the roar? Do you agree with what I said today, or do you have a completely different opinion? Do you want the roar to stay as it is? Let me know down below, and while you're down there, consider subscribing to not miss out on future videos exactly like these. I will see you all out on the seas.
The souls who came before, those poor forgotten saints.